Picture this. You've trained your entire life for this moment. Since you were 6 years old, kicking a ball against a wall, 20 years of sacrifices, injuries, early mornings, late nights. Your country is watching. 80,000 people in the stadium, hundreds of millions at home. And it comes down to this. You, 12 yards, a goalkeeper, and a ball. That's it. That's the whole thing. A penalty kick takes approximately half a second to reach the goal. The goalkeeper physically cannot react in time to see where it's going and then move. They have to guess, which means if you just kick it properly, you score, almost guaranteed. Almost. Welcome to the most psychologically cruel format in professional sports, where the simplest skill in football becomes the hardest thing any athlete has ever done. I'm Bitsy. This is Useful Bits TV. Let's get into it. Let's start with the math, because the math is what makes this so cruel. A penalty kick from 12 yards travels to the goal in roughly 500 milliseconds, half a second. A goalkeeper needs approximately 600 milliseconds to see where the ball is going and react to it. So by pure physics, the goalkeeper cannot save a well-struck penalty. They are too slow. The ball is too fast. The geometry doesn't work in their favor. And yet, in World Cup penalty shootouts since 1982, approximately 30% of penalties are either saved or missed entirely. 30% of kicks that should be physically unsavable. The goalkeeper isn't stopping them with their reflexes, they're stopping them with psychology. And the kicker isn't missing because of poor technique. They've taken this exact kick thousands of times in training. They almost never miss in training. They're missing because their own brain is destroying them from the inside. That's what makes this cruel. It's not a physical challenge. It's a psychological execution, and the executioner is yourself. So what's actually happening in a player's brain during a penalty shootout? Researchers at the University of Twente conducted the first study to measure brain activity during actual penalty kicks, not in a lab using real pitches and real goalkeepers. What they found was this. Players who scored showed high activation in the motor cortex, the movement brain. They were focused entirely on the physical execution of the kick, the technique, the process. Players who missed showed high activation in the prefrontal cortex, the thinking brain, the part of your brain responsible for long-term consequence planning. In other words, the players who missed were thinking about what happens if they miss, while they were taking the kick. They weren't thinking about the ball, they were thinking about the consequences of missing the ball. And that thought, that single intrusive thought, broke the automatic movement pattern they'd spent 20 years building. There's a name for this. It's called choking under pressure, and the specific mechanism is called explicit monitoring. Here's how it works normally. When you learn a skill, really learn it, it becomes automated. Your brain stores the movement pattern in a different region called the cerebellum. It runs on autopilot. You don't think about how to walk, you just walk. Elite athletes have automated their skills to an extraordinary degree. A professional penalty taker doesn't consciously think about their run-up, their planting foot, their striking technique. It just happens automatically. But under extreme pressure, the prefrontal cortex, the conscious thinking brain, tries to take control back. It starts monitoring the automated movement, step by step, consciously. And the moment you start consciously monitoring an automated skill, you break it. It's the centipede's dilemma. Ask a centipede which leg it moves first and it can't walk anymore. The same thing happens to a penalty taker who starts thinking about how they're kicking. The skill they've spent 20 years automating falls apart in half a second. Now here's the part that makes it even more interesting. The goalkeeper knows all of this, not necessarily from reading neuroscience papers, but from experience. The best goalkeepers in the world have figured out, consciously or not, exactly how to trigger the kicker's prefrontal cortex. It's called visual dominance. Goalkeepers who maintain strong eye contact with the kicker during their run-up, who stare directly at them, who stay big, who don't flinch, force the kicker to notice them. And the moment the kicker notices the goalkeeper, really notices them, processes them as a threat, the prefrontal cortex activates. Suddenly, instead of just hitting the ball, the kicker is thinking about the goalkeeper, which side they might go, whether they're going to guess right. The automated process breaks. the conscious brain takes over, and the kick suffers. Research shows goalkeepers who step slightly off their line, maintain eye contact, and delay the kick by doing legal but disruptive things like adjusting gloves or moving around, reduce penalty conversion rates measurably. Jordan Pickford, England's goalkeeper, famously wrote penalty data on his water bottle during shootouts, which side each opponent tends to kick, their patterns under pressure. He was using data to beat psychology. Meanwhile, the kicker is standing 12 yards away with the weight of an entire nation on their shoulders, trying to remember which way they were planning to shoot. It's not a fair fight. It was never a fair fight. Here's the part nobody talks about enough: the walk. When a penalty is awarded in a shootout, the designated kicker has to walk from the center circle to the penalty spot alone. Norwegian sports psychologist Geir Jordet, who has spent 2 decades specifically studying penalty psychology, mapped what he calls the anxiety geography of a shootout. In the center circle, waiting to be called, anxiety is at its absolute peak. The player has no control. They're just waiting, helplessly. As they begin walking toward the ball, anxiety actually decreases slightly because they're moving, they're doing something, they have some sense of agency. But inside the penalty area, placing the ball, stepping back, looking at the goal, anxiety splits in 2 directions. Some players find a moment of calm. The decision is made, the preparation is done, just execute. Other players feel what Jordet describes as a special chill, a physical cold sensation, the full weight of the moment landing at once. And then the referee blows the whistle. From that whistle, the optimal time to run up and strike is neither too fast nor too slow. Research shows that when the pause between the whistle and the kick is balanced, not rushed, not too prolonged, the conversion rate is around 80%. When players rush, trying to escape the pressure, get it over with, conversion rates drop significantly. England, historically one of the worst penalty shootout nations in the world, showed a specific pattern in Jordet's research. English players tended to turn their back on the goalkeeper after placing the ball, an avoidance behavior, and had the fastest average time between whistle and kick of any major nation. They were running from the pressure, literally, which, if you've watched England in any major tournament, tracks perfectly. Here's the thing that makes this psychologically interesting from the outside. The math is on the kicker's side, overwhelmingly. The goal is 7.32 meters wide and 2.44 meters tall. That's 17.86 square meters of target. A goalkeeper can only cover a small portion of that area. They need approximately 600 milliseconds to dive and reach the side of a goal. The ball gets there in under 500 milliseconds. Analysis of 292 World Cup penalties from 1982 to 2022 found that of the 39 penalties hit high and on target in the top third of the goal, none has ever been saved, not one, in 40 years of World Cup shootouts. Zero. The answer has literally been known for 40 years. Hit it in the top third, it goes in. And yet players don't always do this, because hitting the ball into the top third of the goal under maximum pressure is not a technical problem. It's a psychological one. The body doesn't do what the brain tells it when the brain is also dealing with 80,000 people screaming, cortisol flooding the system, and the thought that missing this kick will define your career. Statistics also show that goalkeepers dive left 46% of the time, right 40% of the time, and stay in the middle just 13% of the time, which means statistically the safest place to shoot is directly down the middle. But almost nobody does this consistently under pressure. Because standing in front of a goalkeeper and kicking the ball directly at them, directly where they're standing, requires a level of psychological commitment that is almost impossible to access when every instinct in your body is screaming to go to a corner. The math says middle, the brain says corner, the brain usually wins. Here's the real reason penalty shootouts are the cruelest thing in sports. Not the pressure, not the psychology, not even the physics. It's the isolation. Every other moment in football is collective. If your team loses a match, 11 players lost together. The blame diffuses. The grief is shared. In a penalty shootout, one person walks up alone, takes one kick, and if it misses, that moment belongs to them individually, forever. Roberto Baggio, Italy, 1994 World Cup Final. His miss against Brazil sent the ball over the crossbar and handed Brazil the championship. That image, Baggio standing with his head bowed, hands on his hips, is one of the most reproduced photographs in the history of sport. He said in an interview years later, "I still dream about that penalty. I always will." He had scored every other penalty in that tournament. He was Italy's best player. He volunteered to take the last kick because he was brave enough to. And the moment that defined his career in the public memory is the one he missed. That's not a sporting failure. That's a psychological trap dressed up as a sporting format. The shootout doesn't test who is the best team. It doesn't test who played better for 120 minutes. It removes all of that context and reduces everything to a sequence of individual moments under conditions specifically designed to make humans fail. And then it makes one person carry the weight of that failure alone, forever, which is why the penalty shootout will make you feel things about sport that sport has no right to make you feel. So can you actually prepare for this? Can you train the brain to stay in the motor cortex and out of the prefrontal cortex? The answer, according to sports psychology research, is yes, partially. The most effective techniques involve what's called process focus, training yourself, specifically under simulated pressure, to direct attention only to the technical process of the kick, not the outcome, not the goalkeeper, not the crowd, just the process. England's transformation in penalty shootouts is a real case study here. After decades of shootout failures, the FA implemented a systematic approach starting around 2018. They studied footage of opponents, they analyzed tendencies, they practiced specifically under pressure conditions, not just in empty training sessions, but with teammates watching, with consequences attached. England won their first major tournament shootout since 1996 at the 2018 World Cup against Colombia. The difference wasn't technical, it was psychological infrastructure. Pre-commitment is another technique, deciding exactly where you're going to shoot before you walk up, and committing to that decision absolutely regardless of what the goalkeeper does. No last-minute changes, no reading the goalkeeper. Research shows that kickers who change their mind at the last moment based on goalkeeper movement miss significantly more often than kickers who commit and execute. The brain under pressure wants options. Options are the enemy. The best penalty takers in the world have essentially learned to switch off the thinking brain for half a second, to trust the 20 years of automation, to let the body do what it already knows how to do. Which sounds simple. It is the hardest thing in sports. Half a second. That's all it is. The ball travels 12 yards in half a second. In that half second, 20 years of training, the weight of an entire nation, the anxiety of 80,000 people, the fear of permanent failure, and the fundamental cruelty of being alone all have to be navigated by a brain that evolved to worry about exactly this kind of high-stakes social situation. The penalty shootout doesn't reveal who is the better team. It reveals who can temporarily stop being human. Who can shut off the part of the brain that thinks about consequences, cares about judgment, fears failure, and just hit a ball. Most people can't do it under those conditions, even the ones who've spent their entire lives preparing for it. And that's what makes it the cruelest thing in sports. Not the miss, the fact that missing was always a possibility, no matter how good you are. If you're watching the World Cup right now and a shootout happens, you now know exactly what you're watching. You're watching someone try to be a machine for half a second. Hit subscribe. New video every Thursday. I'm Bitsy. This is Useful Bits TV. See you next one.